It is your Tuesday daily delivery. I am Michael Rand, happy to be back for another day, and I hope everyone is having a great day out there as well. Great show coming up. Chris Hine from the Star Tribune joins me here in just a little bit to talk Wolves offseason, Summer League, USA basketball. He is out in Vegas right now to cover all of those things. Of course, Anthony Edwards with Team USA, making some headlines over the weekend. Kind of felt like it's just Ant being Ant, but kind of talking about his place in USA basketball and also deferring to a certain degree to his elders. He is, 17, 18 years younger than LeBron James, something like that. And he is the future. These guys are still the present. He is the present as well. But Chris and I will get into that, get into Summer League, some of the young Wolves who could help them next year, just the transformation this roster is undergoing this offseason. Subtle, maybe a little bit more around the edges. It's not like the top six in the rotation unless they do something dramatic still that hasn't happened yet. It's not like that is going to change much, right? Like you can imagine very easily that the starting five next year and the first two off the bench, probably Nickeil Alexander-Walker and Naz Reid, will be the same. That you'll have, Mike Conley Jr., Anthony Edwards, Jaden McDaniels, Karl Anthony Towns, and Rudy Gobert. You start with those seven, you are feeling pretty good about themselves. But where the Wolves have changed is like 8 through 12. No more Kyle Anderson, Monte Morris, who came over in that trade in the middle of the season, not here anymore. Jordan McLaughlin, not here anymore. In their place, some younger guys who've been kind of waiting for a couple of years, plus these two draft picks, Rob Dillingham and Terrence Shannon Jr., plus Joe Ingles, the recent free agent signee veteran. These guys will kind of make up the rest of the roster, and as the years go on, could slide into those seventh man, sixth man, starting lineup roles as other things happen, as contracts come due, as guys age out, things like that. So Chris and I will get into all of that here in just a minute. I'll have a Paul George thought, kind of piggybacking on Chris and I talking about Wolves. Paul George talking about feeling disrespected by the Clippers contract offer and how I kind of see it. I read the headline and I was ready to be mad at Paul George for talking about disrespect for a contract that was going to pay him in the nine figures. Nine figures is not disrespectful. But then I read the story and I was like, okay, I kind of see both sides. So I'll get into that at the end of the show. First, though, what did I miss? Let's talk about Brooks Lee for a minute. Can we? We can. It's my podcast. We can talk about whatever we want, I guess. But let's talk about Brooks Lee for a second and just what he has done in 6 games. And you know what? I know. Let's not get carried away by small sample sizes. 6 games is not a career. 6 games, back of the napkin, quick math. I always remember this for some reason. 6 games is 1/27th of one season in Major League Baseball. It's a week of action, right? But Brooks Lee, what he has done so far in 6 games since Royce Lewis was hurt, since the budding star Royce Lewis was hurt. 11 hits, 8 RBIs, including the go-ahead single in the 11th inning of an 8-6 win over the White Sox last night. The game, the Twins would have felt very bad if they lost and now can feel good about winning. Matt Wallner, a huge home run in that game to tie the game. Kind of a back-and-forth game where, good outing by Chris Paddock. A lot of things happened in that game, not all of them good. But Brooks Lee continues to be one of those things that is very good on this team. Those 11 hits, second most in franchise history in a first 6 games of a career. Number 1 on that list, read this from an Aaron Gleeman tweet, Kirby Puckett. That's good company. Again, you don't want to go overboard, but if you looked at Kirby Puckett's first 6 games and said, wow, 14 hits, even while it was happening, people could tell, even though he wasn't hitting for power back then, people could tell that there was something there with Kirby Puckett. Those 8 RBIs in the first 6 games, most in franchise history in the first 6 games of a career. So if you look at it like that, you look at what he's doing, but also how he's doing it and how he looks while he's doing it. The RBI single last night, I just watched the at-bat, and I'm like, this is a guy who looks like he's been doing this for 5 years and will be doing it still for another 10. He just looks like he is major league ready, like he just came out of some sort of elite baseball factory and is now playing baseball for the Twins. Switch hitter, like everything you could want in kind of a, you design a player in a lab. This is Brooks Lee. He looks the part. He is performing like the part. He does not seem like any of this is too much for him. Doesn't seem like any of this is too big for him. He just looks like he is ready from the get-go, and that is a rare thing, especially when we consider the pressure and hype that comes from being a high draft pick. He's a first-round pick, number 8 overall, just a couple years ago. Now, draft time is coming up right now. Next week, Twins will have another crack at loading up their minor league organization, which by all accounts is in really good shape. I think they have a top 10 kind of farm system right now, guys in the pipeline, good organizational depth, things like that. But this is how you hope it works when you get to spend a high draft pick, right? This is how you hope it works, but you don't know. You can project, and he was a college player. It's maybe a tiny bit easier to project what someone might become when they're, 21, when you're drafting them, not 18, 17. But you don't know. You have no real idea how they're going to progress through the system. Brooks Lee has basically looked the part from the very beginning. He was very good at every level. He tried. He was, took him a little while, I think, last year at St. Paul, but he kind of got things going. This year at St. Paul, he was terrific once he came back from his own injury. Now with the Twins, looks like he wants to be here to stay. And of course, he's not going to get 11 hits in every 6-game span, right? We're not saying he's going to average almost 2 hits a game for his major league career. If he does that, he will go into Cooperstown as, with the greatest player of all time, right? Let's not extrapolate out his stats after 6 games. But what you're looking at is a guy who looks the part. How long have we been saying, man, wouldn't it be nice if the Twins just had a guy come up and just look the part immediately, become what you hope they are right from the get-go? I mean, we've had so many kind of false starts, hits and misses with some of their draft picks over the years. Even a guy like Buxton, Sano, up and down, never quite kind of getting that full real appreciation for what they could do. Now the Twins look like they have 2 of these guys. Royce Lewis, of course, is that guy. We know he's that guy if he can stay healthy. Brooks Lee looks like that guy. We don't know for sure if he's that guy yet because we haven't seen it for a long enough stretch, but they look like they have 2 of these guys at least who look the part, who don't just look like the part like, hey, this guy could come up, be a good, middle infielder, solid 7 hitter for a few years. Like, these guys look like they could be stars for the next decade. That is a wonderful place for the Twins to be right now.
I'm Chris Hine, Timberwolves beat writer at the Star Tribune and the first 5-time guest in daily delivery history. Thank you for listening to this podcast. This work is made possible by our Star Tribune subscribers. For unlimited access to the articles mentioned in this podcast, our coverage of Minnesota sports from pros to preps, and even all of Rand's future blog posts about how the Timberwolves should trade for players they will never get, go to startribune.com/subscribe.
Let's talk Timberwolves today with Chris Hine from the Star Tribune, because frankly, Chris, there's not much of an off season this year, is there? Maybe in a little bit there'll be some kind of off season, but it's been coming in waves so far, hasn't it?
It has. I hope there's an off season soon because I have a book I have to write by November.
Yes, you do. Yes, you do.
I need a break at some point here. This is crazy, but yeah, this is the longest I'll be out in Las Vegas ever. In my tenure here as Wolves beat writer. So it's. I mean, like we were saying before we recorded, what's better than Vegas in the middle of July? So
can't beat it, right? It's hot.
118 degrees yesterday. 118. Yeah,
that's a lot. And at least there's a lot of green spaces to cool yourself off.
A lot of water. Yeah, all that.
I mean, go find a pool. You'll find a pool. You'll be all right. But you need time off to write a book on Anthony Edwards, and he made some headlines, I guess, over the weekend, kind of talking about Team USA and his role there. To me, it just kind of seemed like classic Ant stream of consciousness. What did you make of the internet getting a buzz with him saying the things he said?
Yeah, I think that's a good term for it, kind of classic Ant stream of consciousness. Like if you ask Anthony Edwards a question about like who's gonna want the ball, who's
Yes.
like the primary option, you're just setting him up essentially
Yes.
to
Right.
have a clip like he had yesterday, and of course it
Yes.
goes viral. All that stuff. That is Anthony Edwards. He is ultimately confident in himself and his abilities, and that's kind of what you need to have when you're a star player is a little bit of irrational and
Yes.
overconfidence.
Yes.
Every great player has that. But I will say, kind of what I wrote for today, outside of that comment, he had a lot of things to say about, well, they told me, they told us the young guys, like, we might not be playing a lot of minutes. There might be
Yeah.
games where we don't play, and that's okay because I'm here with a lot of Hall of Famers. And then he said, if somebody was like the alpha late in the game who's going to be like taking the big shots, he's like, I hope it's Kevin Durant. He's like, that's
Right.
what I came here to see. Yeah.
Right.
So obviously, he loves Kevin Durant, and we'll talk about his love of Kevin Durant any opportunity he gets. So, very, very typical. You see one soundbite making its way around the internet, and it was a good one. But also, I think it was interesting to hear other things that he had to say as well, which is more kind of in line with like where the expectations are for what his role might be on this team this summer.
Well, and we want our athletes to be confident with it. It's like, oh, not too confident. Don't say that. Don't imply that you might be
Right.
next in line, or that a 22-year-old, he's still 22, might be the emerging face of the NBA instead of a 40-year-old, LeBron James, something like that. Like it's all, it's all in good measure. It's all I think if you like you said, if you know Anthony Edwards, you know exactly what he was saying. He's not saying I'm the guy. He's saying, yeah, if I got the ball in my hands, then everybody should play off me, they got to adjust to me, stuff like that, because I've got some skills too. But he's well versed enough to know kind of where he falls into the pecking order still at this point, I would think, even if he is confident.
Yeah, that's kind of the thing is like if he gets in the game and he's playing, he's not going to be shy.
No,
and
you wouldn't want him to be.
You wouldn't want him to be. You're out there on the floor. Go play to the best of your ability. Don't shy away from the moment. But yeah, if he doesn't play, if he's coming off the bench, if he's playing limited minutes, that's okay too. And I actually think, and he said this a little bit yesterday, I actually think one way that he can get on the floor for this team is with his defense.
Yes.
If he focuses on that end of the floor, because what they don't have a lot of on this team is very good on-ball defenders. So
right.
if he can come off the bench for them, give them some minutes of just hard work on the defensive end of the floor, and be the guy who maybe handles the other team's primary perimeter threat.
Yeah,
I think that's a pathway for him to play some minutes in this thing.
Yeah. So on Team USA, he's Jaden McDaniels. On Team Timberwolves,
essentially,
he's Anthony Edwards. Yeah,
right.
And that makes sense. That's kind of where he is in his progression. Although obviously, everybody knows how talented he is, and he could take over any game. It's interesting. We haven't talked since the draft. I think we talked right before the draft, right? Unless I'm mistaken. Unless we talked right afterwards. I don't think so. I think we set up the draft and kind of what could happen, and then the draft happens, and it's fascinating, right? They do the move up to get Rob Dillingham. They take Terrence Shannon Jr. at 27, and all of a sudden, an offseason where I was like, how are they going to get better, and how are they going to, with the assets they had in the draft, with the very little cap space they had, or second apron type stuff. You add those two guys, Kyle Anderson goes in that kind of convoluted 18-team trade, which essentially was him signing with Golden State. Right. But they do get some stuff out of that too. But then they signed Joe Ingles, who seems like a pretty good 1-year fit for whatever role he might have here. I don't know if they got like better, but they've got some potential now where you see not just the present, but the future, especially at point guard with Dillingham.
They're different now.
Yes.
It's going to be a different mix coming off the bench next
Yes.
year because if you're assuming a 9-man rotation for most of the regular season, that's essentially 2 new guys filling in spots 8 and 9 next
Yep.
season, and you assume Dillingham is going to get first crack at
Yep.
significant minutes, and you assume probably to start the season that Joe Ingles is probably going to be that other player, especially given
Yep.
his
Yep.
shooting. He's a 41% career 3-point shooter.
Yeah.
We know how much this team can use some shooting. So that would just be my pecking order to start the season. But I think that there's a lot of opportunity there, and why Summer League is going to be so important too for some of these guys, like even Terrence Shannon Jr.,
Yep.
for Leonard Miller, Josh Minot, Jalen Clark,
Yep.
to step up and show what they got and legitimately now grab some minutes. And injuries always play a factor, and that affects the rotation as well. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how that battle shakes out. Who kind of wins that 10th slot
Right.
on the roster? Miller and Minot are kind of like, in a way, kind of the springy forwards. Minot can defend a little bit. You've seen his athleticism. Miller is a big rebounder. We'll see where they're at defensively. Shannon is kind of a different mix of that. He's going to be a scorer. We'll see how his defense translates to the NBA. But if the Wolves need buckets coming off the bench, then Terrence Shannon Jr. could crack the rotation from day one. And he's already 23 years old, so
Yeah. He's
he's
older than Ant. He's older than
he's
Ant.
older than Ant, right? He's older than a lot of guys on the team. So he's kind of NBA. He's going to be as ready for the NBA as you can be coming out of
Yeah.
college, I think, in some ways. So we'll see how this shakes out. I think it's going to be interesting. Chris Finch is probably going to have to play a couple of these young guys. He didn't have to do that last year.
Mm-hmm.
But this year, I think he's going to have to. And I think, it'll be interesting to see how this sets the Wolves up for late in the season, kind of where they're at that point. And, I think the move on draft night, if anything, it's almost like a medium term move for this team, right? Like Dillingham, rookie year, probably has to maybe develop out his body a little bit more. But you're hoping he can contribute. But the season after, 2 seasons down the road, what does it look like with him, and where do they stand with some of their bigger names at that point, like Gobert and Towns? So it's gonna be interesting to see how this mix shakes out this year. I'm really intrigued to see how it affects the overall team. They definitely got better offensively coming off the bench. It feels like. I just don't know where that's going to leave them defensively in that part of the game.
Well, Dillingham is interesting too, because how else could they add a top 10 pick, right? Like they don't have a pick next year, like without giving up any kind of like asset from their current team. It seemed next to impossible unless you get this kind of bizarre 2031 trade with San Antonio. And don't forget the 2030 pick swap. And that could be valuable in 6 years, but they're not playing for 6 years from now. They're playing for the next probably now through the next probably 4 or 5 years. That's gotta be what they see as their like true window of like championship contention, right? Like depending on if they extend Gobert, what they do with Towns, things like that. But you got Edwards under contract. You've got now Dillingham, who could get better, who could give Ant like a legitimate running mate in the backcourt if he's as good as they think he is offensively. So yeah, it was an interesting, medium term move, right? Or even a long term move to like sustain. Like if they hit on that and he's as good as they hope he is offensively, like that changes the dynamic of them into the next decade, perhaps.
100%. It absolutely does. That's what you hope. You hope that Rob Dillingham, that's the goal here. But yeah, it really is it is setting them up for the medium term. I think almost even better, perhaps, than than right now in some ways. If you think Dillingham's ceiling can reach that point, just more experience in the league is going to help with that. But this is it. This is their chance. There was no question they were going to run this back, go into the tax, deal with the second apron. This is just what it takes. When they made the Rudy Gobert trade, the second apron hadn't been devised yet.
No, it wasn't a thing.
It wasn't a thing yet. So there was no long-term planning on their part back then that, they knew it. A new CBA is coming because that's where they were at in the calendar. You just didn't quite know that it was going to look like this. Yeah. But they knew at that point in time that if this worked, they were going to be going into the tax for a while. And so when you make it to the Western Conference Finals and you're knocking on the door of the finals, you've got to push the chips into the middle of the table. And I think if you're going to go for it, you got to go for it. And that's what they did. I wrote before the draft that I wasn't expecting Tim Connolly to sit on his hands and simply just draft with 27 and 37. I didn't quite expect that kind of move.
No.
But looking back on it, it made a lot of sense with where they're at in terms of the second apron, because if there was only one place where you could make a significant splash, the easiest place to do that was by trading in the draft.
Yeah.
And
it was
because and they did.
And we thought going into it, maybe they could package 27 and 37 and maybe something else and get into the mid to late teens if someone started to slide. I did not see 8 coming. I was like, what? Who? How did they do that?
Well, exactly. That was sitting there on draft night. It was like, oh, Dillingham's going to Minnesota. What the hell do they give up?
Right.
And I think we were all a little surprised when we saw that the return was a 2030 swap and 2031 unprotected first round pick. So if I'm the Wolves beat writer from here on out, some of my draft nights are going to be relatively easy.
Yes, there's not going to be a lot going on.
There's going to be a lot for the next decade. Not going to be a lot going on.
Because what's don't they probably just have one draft between now and then 2028 that's not impacted by either a swap or not even impacted by a swap or anything, right? For first rounders.
For first rounders, yeah. Right now 2028 is the only draft where they have a pick and it's not a swap.
Right.
2026 is a Utah swap, 2030 is a San Antonio swap, and all the other picks are gone. 2032, that pick is about to be. They can't deal it anyway because they've already dealt the 2031 pick. But under the rules of the second apron, that 2032 pick is going to be frozen from being dealt. And if they don't get out of the second apron, I think in 3 of the next 4 years after this season, that pick is automatically going to go to number 30 in the draft. That's another repercussion of the second apron.
Okay.
But that's 8 years.
8 years down the road. These guys are these guys are living for today, living for tomorrow, living for the next 3 to 5 years.
If this industry is any indication, 8 years from now, it'll be somebody else explaining the ramifications of
yes,
and why it's at 30 and not me. You never know.
Yes, and you're right. This is life when you're good. You gotta pay to stay good, and you got to figure it out as you go along. Kind of make it up on the fly. Squeeze yourself under when you need to be under. Keep stockpiling assets, then go for it. And that's kind of where they are right now. I think that's Conley Connolly foreshadowed that. He kind of said it we're not going to shrink away from it. We're at the big table now. You don't get to that point and say, that was nice, but boy, we don't want to spend money now that we're here. Right.
Mm-hmm. It's basically the opposite of my approach to being in Las Vegas. I stay away from the big tables.
Right.
I stay away from the big tables. I'll put a 20 in the video blackjack machine and have some fun with that. That's I take the opposite approach in Vegas. But yes, they are they're going for it, and you have to respect it. They're going for it because this is a time unlike any other in the franchise's history, and the window's open. The West is, I guess we could talk about this a little bit. The West is tough, but not impossible, I feel like. I think a lot of teams got worse in the Western Conference this offseason.
Yes.
I think one team is significantly better, and that was Oklahoma City.
Yes, the Caruso trade and just what they have.
The Caruso trade and Isaiah Hartenstein coming in. It feels like they really addressed some needs there.
Right.
And so I think Oklahoma City has to be is probably the favorites in the West going into next year, but I think the Wolves are right there behind them. I would say. I
think Dallas got better, but Denver got a little bit worse.
I don't know about Dallas.
It depends on what you think of Clay, but
I'm not as high on Clay, but
I think he might be a classic change of scenery guy, and if he can just be 15 points a game and not carry a dynasty anymore, he might fit there pretty well. But we'll see. Denver is still going to be fine, even though they lost Caldwell Pope. They'll, as long as Jokic and Murray are healthy, they're going to be a factor. But Clippers got worse by far. The Lakers are still weird. Like they can't figure out how to build their roster around the rest of those guys. The Kings, I kind of like the DeRozan move for the Kings, even though he's old. He can still play. I think that was okay. And the Pelicans made some
Brandon Ingram
moves.
Is on the trade block allegedly there, so we'll see how that plays out.
I don't trust them with Zion. You never know if he's going to be healthy or not, but they're definitely.
We have to see where Memphis is going to be next year. If Memphis comes back and is like who they were 2 years ago, if they're back to being that, we'll see.
The Wolves go into the season though clearly in the top four, like unless something unless they have injury, something like that. They go into that feeling like, okay, this is a home playoff team again and a real contender. Because if you feel like you're top four, you're a contender, and they are that. Joe Ingles feels like a perfect move. Let's finish there. Like I don't know if he is exactly what he used to be, and even what he used to be wasn't super like, his game is a little bit ponderous, a little bit like Kyle Anderson, but a different Kyle Anderson, but just his ability to kind of distribute the shooting he brings, the kind of veteran, like that's the kind of like not splashy, but important signing that a good team can make now.
It made a lot of sense on a number of fronts, given the Utah connection with Conley and Gobert, given his shooting ability. I think they were interested in him prior to this season as well.
Yeah.
And it does make a lot of sense, especially for the minimum where they're at and where he's at in his career. This is the kind of signing that you make when you're the Wolves. And it seems like with the other roster spot, they're kind of taking a flyer on a Tim Connolly favorite, PJ Dozier.
Yeah.
Who spent last season in Europe, coming back now with the roster spot here in Minnesota. But the Ingles signing makes a lot of sense from just where this team is philosophically, in terms of roster fit, in terms of locker room fit, all that stuff. Definitely could see that one coming down the pike for sure.
Yeah. Think of how maybe it wasn't widespread, but think of how we think of Tim Connolly right now versus the way I was thinking of him a year ago, when you're coming off of the rough year with Gobert, and he was flirting with that Wizards job, or at least not denying that was out there, and not just completely putting the kibosh on it. Like I've completely done a 180 on Connolly in the last year.
I think you and a lot of fans have. It's amazing what winning can do, right?
Yes.
You're the everybody's villain one year, and then toast of the town the next year.
Yeah.
It's almost like sometimes things take time, right?
We don't want to be patient. We don't want to be patient.
Well, listen, and I don't blame people for not being patient when you trade that much to get Rudy Gobert and it doesn't work out the way you hope in year one. And obviously Towns' injury played a role that first year as well. But it's, look at Dallas too. Dallas kind of went through the same thing. They trade for Kyrie, and it looked like a disaster for half a season. 2 seasons ago. And then this past season, it clicked in and it worked.
Yeah.
And, I think there's lessons to be learned from that. You just don't hit the eject button right away.
No.
On these things. And, Tim Connolly has had a really good rip. I think it's just interesting that the thing that always intrigued me about what he did with the Gobert trade was in Denver, he always kind of built through the draft. He got this team together. He did make a significant trade to get Aaron Gordon in.
Right.
But in general, he made a very patient roster with an eye towards the future and having that group just kind of coalesce together. And his first big move in Minnesota was to basically upend all that.
Yeah.
I always thought it was just interesting from a philosophical standpoint, the way that he just came in and said, screw this continuity with this group that just made the playoffs. We think we have something here. We're going to push the chips in now. And, it'll be interesting to see how some of his draft picks pan out here. We haven't, because of where they were roster wise, there hasn't really been a need for his draft picks to produce these last 2 years. But now
that's going to change.
We're in a spot that's going to change where they're going to have to get something soon out of some of these draft picks that he's made in 3 draft cycles now with the Wolves.
Well, and we'll see some of that, some of the early results of that in Summer League. Chris Hine out in Vegas for multiple reasons, but I'm sure we'll get some good reports on that. Chris, enjoy Vegas as much as you can. Stay inside when you need to. Dip your toes in the pool. Stay cool. And I'm sure we'll talk to you soon.
Sounds good, Mike. Appreciate it.
Great stuff from Chris. You got to love the NBA, too. They know how to package things, market things. You got the USA basketball camp in Vegas right now. They got an exhibition game tomorrow against Canada. That's a good one before they kind of take their show on the road and then get ready for the Olympics in Paris. And then right after that, it's Summer League in Vegas for a while, too. So Chris will be giving you all the good stuff from Vegas for a while now. It's a big Summer League for the Wolves, like Chris and I talked about. A lot of their guys trying to vie for those, I think Chris framed it up nicely, that kind of like 8 through 11 spot on the roster. The guys that maybe won't necessarily determine every game right away, but depth guys, some of those guys are going to play right away. They're going to play meaningful minutes, but other guys might get opportunities if guys get injured. They're going to get opportunities in future years, things like that. They have to make sure that they know they are ready. The Wolves need to know who they can count on. This is a big summer league for 4 or 5 guys that Chris and I talked about. Let's finish with the cooler. Paul George mentioned this at the beginning of the show. He feels disrespected. And I was like, oh man, are you kidding me? Disrespected because you're making 9 figures. And I read the story. Paul George, of course, going to Philadelphia, no longer with the Clippers. Clippers keeping James Harden, keeping, of course, Kawhi Leonard, but couldn't keep the big 3 together. Tried to give Paul George an offer, and he says the initial offer was like 2 for 60-something, and I'm sure that was just a starting point. He said they kept creeping up with the number. It eventually became like $45 million a year. I don't consider that insulting. I don't consider that disrespectful, but he gets to the end. He wants the same contract Kawhi Leonard got, basically 3 years, $150 million, no trade clause, and the Clippers wouldn't do it. I think they would give him the money, it sounds like, but not the no trade clause. So he's worried, hey, am I going to get in there and, and a year from now they're going to trade me? He wanted then 4 years for like $212. That'll be the full max. They wouldn't do that. So he goes to Philadelphia, gets his money, and says, I felt disrespected by it. And I'm like, God, I see it both ways, right? Like it's crazy to think about, are you disrespected when someone is going to make you that kind of offer? But if you think of Paul George and Kawhi Leonard as a package deal, and then you're like, okay, well, you'll give him one thing, but you won't give me the same thing, even though I've been on the court a lot more than this guy, or at least it seems like it. He was far more healthy this past season. He played a ton of games, like 70-some games, had career highs in a lot of shooting metrics. Like Paul George, I get why the Clippers wouldn't want to do that with all their guys, but if I was betting on one guy to carry me for the next 3 or 4 years, I think I would have picked Paul George and not Kawhi Leonard. I certainly would have picked Paul George over James Harden. So I don't know. I can see why he felt like, man, why pick those guys over me? Why would you give, especially Kawhi Leonard, a certain amount of money, but not me? Kawhi Leonard, who has not been able to stay healthy at all. So I get it, but I don't get it. And this whole disrespect angle gets played too much. Players are like, they didn't want me. It's like, well, yeah, they did, but it's also a business that cuts both ways. So I see it on both sides. I read the headline. I was ready to be mad. I was like, God, come on. Let's not talk about being disrespected when you are in a ultimate position of privilege. But then you have to see it from all sides. And so I get it a little bit, at least, why he would feel that way. That will do it for me today. Chip Scoggins going to join me on tomorrow's show to talk a bunch of things, but Chip wrote about the festering, still ongoing Comcast, Bally Sports, Diamond Sports problem that's going on right now. The Twins still not on Comcast. It's been over 2 months. I wouldn't think that's going to get any better in the next few weeks. Maybe this kind of late July deadline that they've now set where you got to have some sort of resolution to it, the date that got pushed back by 6 weeks that's making this all last longer than anybody wants. Maybe that will shake something loose, but Chip and I are going to talk about that, among other things, on Wednesday's show. Until then, I am Michael Rand. We will talk to you again tomorrow.